Hey guys, it's Misty from the Book Rat, and if you weren't aware, it is currently Austin in August. My last video I asked what you guys wanted to see. Pretty. Ignore her. Pretty. Stop it. Knock it off. Knock it off. Stop. Just stop. Yeah, that's a good girl. My last video, I asked what you guys wanted to see, and the consensus was kind of all of the above. And though I don't think I'll be able to do everything, I do want to try to do bits and pieces of everything that I mentioned, one of which was first impressions. So today I'm going to be doing a first impressions of The One That Got Away by Melissa Pimentel. This is a contemporary retelling of Persuasion, which is one of my favorites. I go back and forth between Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger Abbey, and I understand that that is half of Jane Austen's completed body of work, but it is what it is. So the full synopsis as well as links to this book will be in the description, so you can find out all of that kind of detail-y stuff there, but for the purposes of this video, what I'm going to do is give you an excerpt from the book so you can get a feel of the style, and then give you my first impressions based on what I read and whether I would continue reading. I'll leave a timestamp below and on screen in case you want to skip past the excerpt, but to keep this video from being endless as mine normally are, I'm going to go ahead and get straight into it. So not much you need to know going into the excerpt. The main character, Ruby, is getting ready to head out of town for a wedding at which she is going to see her ex, who is suddenly very successful. You can see the Persuasion parallels already. So, from The One That Got Away. Pretty. You gotta stop it, babe. Okay. First I'm gonna put Pretty upstairs, and then we'll get straight into it. So, from The One That Got Away. I was furiously blowing on the scalding coffee when something caught my eye. Staring out at me from the magazine rack was none other than my ex-boyfriend, his face smiling smugly out from the cover of TechCrunch magazine. "Can Ethan Bailey save the world?" the headline asked, as if specifically designed to annoy me. "I'm guessing not," I muttered as I pulled a copy from the rack and slapped it down on the counter. $4, said the unsmiling man, hand outstretched. I peeled off the bills and shoved the magazine deep into my bag, where I could feel it throbbing, and then headed off to catch my train. The Morris and Essex line is a miniature socioeconomic tour of the greater New York area. I stared out the window as we chundered through Chelsea, speeding past the boutique shops and expensive cocktail bars, out past the High Line and over the Hudson River into New Jersey, through Hoboken and into a sea of squat industrial parks dotted with billboards advertising strip clubs and loan sharks and auto body shops, until the first ad for West Elm appeared, and you knew you were out in the suburbs. I finished off the last bit of bagel and pulled the magazine out of my bag, holding it gingerly between thumb and forefinger as though it might be radioactive. Which it sort of was, at least to me. The coffee I'd gulped down made an unwelcome reappearance in my esophagus. I leaned in and inspected the photograph. He hadn't changed at all. If anything, he was now better looking. He had the confident sheen of wealth shining out of every pore, and had obviously used some of his apparently now vast fortune to have his teeth straightened and whitened. His dark hair was slightly shorter, but still curled around his temples, and his eyes were the same greenish gold I remembered. Yes, it was definitely him. A beacon of success heralded the world over as the designer of a generation, and presumably described as one of the city's most eligible bachelors somewhere in the article. At least, he was still a bachelor the last time I'd allowed myself to Google him, once every 2 months, no more, following his split from some leggy fashion editor. I skimmed the article, which contained the word genius so many times, I seriously considered sending a thesaurus to the sub-editor, and allowed myself to stare at the accompanying photographs for exactly 4 minutes. There he was with the late Steve Jobs, arm tossed jovially around his shoulder as they grinned out at the camera in matching turtlenecks. Now he was at the Met Gala, aforementioned leggy fashion editor wrapped around him like a baby monkey on a tree branch. And finally, there was a picture of him with his business partner, arms slung around each other's shoulders and smiling at each other as if they couldn't believe their luck. I couldn't believe it either. If you had told me 10 years ago that Ethan would end up designing one of the most used and best loved apps of all times, I would have laughed in your face. Actually, first I would have asked you what an app was, and then I would have laughed in your face. I closed the magazine and shoved it back in my bag. You know that feeling when you put coin after coin into a slot machine without winning a single penny, only to walk away and watch the next person who drops a quarter in win the jackpot? That was the feeling that I had been living with for the past 7 years, ever since Ethan's face first appeared in Wired in an article entitled Rising Stars. I drank half a bottle of vodka with Jess that night, eventually setting fire to the magazine and placing it in a garbage can in what Jess had promised would be a cleansing ritual, but which ended up just melting the plastic garbage can to the living room carpet and resulted in a serious deduction from our security deposit. The trees whizzed by as the train sped deeper into New Jersey. I closed my eyes and leaned against the window, head knocking rhythmically against the pane as the train clicked over the tracks. Tomorrow, I would see him again. The first time in nearly 10 years. What could I possibly say to him? Would he even talk to me? What if he still had feelings for me? Or worse, what if he didn't? I swatted the thought from my mind like an errant fly. The man opposite caught my eye and gave me a friendly smile. He was dressed in a suit, but the edges of his cuffs were frayed and his collar slightly yellowed, and he had the harried look of a man teetering on the brink. I looked back at the whizzing trees, which were thinning slowly and being replaced by identikit clapboard houses and the occasional strip mall. What if I still loved him after all this time? What the hell was I supposed to do then? So that is a taste of The One That Got Away, and now for my initial thoughts. I found this very quick and readable. Like, it just kind of drags you along, it flows really seamlessly, and I normally sit down for first impressions and aim to read about 25 to 30 pages because I think that's a good enough excerpt to get a feel for the style and where the story's going and whether I'm going to kind of gel with it, whether I would recommend it. Now, it could still always go off the rails. I've had books that I've loved all the way up until the end and then been like, you kidding me? So, first impressions, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt, but for me, I found 25 to 30 pages, it's a good sweet spot to make an informed guess and decision on whether it's something I would keep going on and whether I would recommend that you pick it up and keep going on. This I found, I was outside, it was a nice, sunny day, and I was cuddling with my cat, and before I knew it, I was definitely past that 25 page mark, hadn't even noticed, wasn't even thinking about it. So it obviously draws you in and kind of pulls you along, and that's always a good thing. Partly, of course, Austen adaptations are always going to draw me in and pull me along. I'm always curious to see how things are adapted, how things are changed, especially when it's translated to a contemporary novel. Some things that are kind of major plot points don't always work in a contemporary setting, and so it's interesting to see how it's going to be translated. And I am really curious how some of the persuasion elements are going to be translated to current day. That said, I can kind of see where the groundwork is being laid, and I'm very interested by it. I think the idea of having Ethan / Wentworth go from being, normal dude to tech billionaire is kind of perfectly suited to the time that we live in, and also a very clever play on his changing fortunes in Persuasion. So I really like that. I think I'm most curious to see what split them apart to begin with, because the whole idea of Persuasion is that it's outside influences, and that the main character, Anne in Persuasion, was a little too easily worked on and listened to other people instead of her heart. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out in the modern setting. Also, it's going to be interesting to see how Anne as a character and Wentworth as a character translate into Ruby and Ethan. I'm already seeing some changes in Ruby just within those first, 30 or 40 pages. She's funnier, and I feel like she's going to have more of a backbone than Anne, who, could be a little bit of a wallflower sometimes and could definitely be a pushover. I think maybe Ruby will have some pushover elements, but I think she's also going to have a little bit more of a modern, boss bitch streak to her, I think. I guess we'll see, but I think that that might be part of her story path, so who knows? I might be projecting a little too much, this early on, but long story short, the adaptation elements are what kind of have me the most curious at this point, and Ruby's humor. her potential for character growth. I think those are the things that really most intrigue me. As for the story just generally, I get the feeling, and I could be totally wrong, but I get the feeling that it's going to be a very fun and light take on the story, and kind of Persuasion I've always thought of as one of Austen's more serious and slightly sad stories. There's a real kind of undercurrent of sadness and lost potential and things like that, and I think there may be some of that in this, but I think also it's going to feel very much like contemporary romance. I think it's going to kind of straddle that line of ease and simplicity that romance novels tend to have, and I mean, it's even got a billionaire to boot, which is the current romance trend. So I think it's going to have a lot in common with just general straightforward romance of today, which might make it an easier in for people who aren't familiar with Austen, or who would be put off by Austen and think, well, I don't know Persuasion, so I don't think I can read that. I think it's going to be straightforward romance, kind of using Persuasion as the framework. I guess it kind of depends on the type of reader you are. That might mean that it's not toothsome enough for some readers, and not enough, you know, highbrow Jane Austen in there, maybe too frothy or whatever, I don't know. But at the same time, it kind of widens it out to a larger audience, I think. So it just kind of depends on your expectations going in and what you're looking for going in. But I feel like it's going to be really heavy on the current standard romance template. I guess we'll see, but that's the impression I'm getting so far. The only real drawback I have this early on is more of a potential. It's not a drawback yet, but something I'm going to kind of keep an eye on when I keep reading and am concerned about, and that is the main character being too down on herself and too, it's hard to explain. It's suited to Anne to be a little down on herself because that's the character of Anne Elliot. So I would imagine Ruby would be somewhat, and would be concerned about kind of her fading bloom of youth and whatever. That's at the heart of Persuasion. At the same time, it's just kind of a trend I've been seeing a lot in books lately. I've just been reading a lot of women who run themselves down, and I'm kind of over it. Something that might get under my skin, while at the same time I completely understand where it comes from, and it's just going to depend on how it's handled and how much of a tendency to wallow Ruby has. I'm hoping that she kind of gets over that and embraces how awesome she is earlier rather than later, but won't know until I keep reading. On that score, I fully intend to keep reading. This was really quick, it was enjoyable, I love Persuasion, it doesn't get adapted enough, and I love to see where it goes. And I think the way Persuasion plays out makes it really well suited for modern day, because it's still a story that's relatable. Sometimes in Austen you have things that aren't as relatable anymore. Most of us aren't going to marry the Lord of the Manor, you know? But people do have lost loves in The One That Got Away, and they do have other people's opinions, you know, influencing the course of their life, and regrets and things like that, and that's something that Persuasion explores really well. So I think it's a story that translates perfectly to modern times and will continue to translate, because these are very human things to go through. I think it's not of an era. I would be inclined to keep reading regardless, but I think the writing is fun and quick enough that it alone would make me want to keep reading, so I'm looking forward to finding out how it all plays out. So that is my first general impressions of The One That Got Away by Melissa Pimentel. This one is out now, so you can go pick it up if you were intrigued by the excerpt or my thoughts. If you have read it, I would definitely like to know what you thought of it in the comments. And if you have any other favorite Austen adaptations, or specifically Persuasion adaptations, whether they're current or, you know, historical, traditional, futuristic sci-fi, whatever they are, definitely let me know about them. I'm always on the hunt for them. That is all for this Austen and August video. There's plenty more on the Austen and August main page. Like, this is the 8th year, so there's a whole lot of backlog that you can look through, but also 3 or 4 new posts going up every single day. So there's all kinds of stuff. So I will leave a link below to the main page. You can go check out all of that, but that's all for now. As always, thanks for watching and happy reading.